So in this video, we're going to demonstrate the idea of the Trinity and show how it's encoded in a lot of different films, movies, and games, but also to show what's also being encoded in the religious idea of it. As far as I know, it's not in any religious text, but this is not to attack any religion or any belief. This is just to show what may also be being shown by this encoding of the idea of the Trinity. And this doesn't mean that one or the other is wrong. They both actually could be right, but I just want you to see it in this perspective. So let's start off with the film, the Infinity Saga or the Avengers films. All of this will come together, but we'll break it down in just a few different films so you can kind of see. So in the last Avengers films, there was two films, the Infinity Saga. The final act or the final battle was between Thanos, and it started off with the three main Avengers, Thor, Captain America, and Iron Man, a trinity, right? But in the first film, we see all of these members fight Thanos by themselves, and they all get beat down individually, so they're unable to stop him by themselves. But you should consider that these characters all represent something in the sky. They're all personifications of the sky. So we all know that Thor and Captain America both have angel ears on their costumes because it's letting you know that they're angels or angels of the sun. That's why Captain America has a star in his shirt, star in his chest, star in his shield, This is why Thor, his story is pretty obvious, retelling of like a fallen angel type story. And then we have Anthony Stark, or a tiny star. So you have three stars versus Thanos, who's a character who's personifying the moon. He's also known as the Mad Titan, which is a giant moon. But in his case, he's playing not just a full moon, he's playing a super moon, a Titan moon. And whenever you see these kind of characters in films who you can identify as a super moon or a Titan moon, the first person you're going to see them challenge usually is a full moon, right? And we see that Thanos did this, where the first character that we see him fight is the Hulk, and it takes like a minute for him to beat the Hulk. And Hulk is a character who is moon-based. This is why throughout the whole series, he wasn't able to transform because the supermoon took the shine. And this happens with a lot of other characters who are moon-based, a part of the Avengers. And if you notice, most of the characters who were snapped away were moon characters, and most of the characters who lived were sun characters. And if they did live, they changed characteristics, like Black Widow's hair became blonde. This is not by coincidence. These are direct reasons. And I can demonstrate that in a separate video. But we have the three stars versus the supermoon. And we see that's how the fight starts. In the first film, we see that Thanos sacrifices his daughter a soul for a soul. And then we see that Tony Stark, or a tiny star, is able to live because Doctor Strange gave a tiny star the time stone for Anthony Stark. So this film is definitely encoding the sky as characters. And then even for the trailer, it says, "I have an idea." There was an idea. That's the first opening line for any footage we've ever seen of these films. It says there was an idea, and what it is a giant moon and a small star being shown. Now, what you'll see in these type of films is whenever there's a three stars versus a moon, you'll see that one of the stars will have an unexpected bright shine to it. It'll shine bright unexpectedly. We see this in Captain America, where he's now able to use Thor's hammer, right? But then we also see sacrifice on Iron Man's part. And then we also see like an out of shape Thor, right? So it's like Thor was blessed with all the gifts in the other films, right? Naturally blessed, but then he has challenges in this one, right? And then we see Iron Man, who is willing to sacrifice himself, but he's usually the selfish character. And then we see Captain America, who can sacrifice himself. It's just no opportunity for him to sacrifice himself was presented, but then he becomes selfish at the end by saying, "Okay, I'm going to give up my superhero days," and he becomes an old man. But consider what these characters represent. You know, Thanos, you see him play with dust a lot, right? Pointing to that he's the moon. He's all about balance. You know, the moon is a something that's about balance. He has an order called the Black Order, and one of the characters who was held from the film is called Supergiant. And I think that was done because it would have given it away that these characters are actually represented in the sky. Now, I know this may seem far-fetched, but I'll show you this exact scenario and so many other movies and films throughout this video. But before we move on, I just wanted to focus on the idea of when the Avengers were fighting Ultron. Ultron has the word Ron in it, which points back to moon. This is why he was talking about a giant rock in the sky, right? Anytime you hear an asteroid story or anything giant in the sky, it's a play or a retelling of the story of a supermoon, right? And it's just twisted up a little bit, but it encodes the supermoon. So you have a giant rock in the sky. He talks about the dinosaurs. He builds a rock in the sky. That was the idea of Ultron. So he's the same kind of idea as the moon. And this is why the supermoon at the end of the film of Age of Ultron says, "I'll do it myself." These characters somehow don't know each other, but they both have the same mission, right? And then we look at the one of the Transformers films called Dark Side of the Moon. We have a character called Sentinel Prime, right? And Sentinel is usually a word that's always used with giants. Think about Sentinels from the X-Men, Sentinels from the Matrix. But this character of Sentinel Prime is found in the beginning of the film to be alive on the dark side of the moon, right? So we have these giants on the dark side of the moon. And what's interesting with him is he is found, I believe, in the Ark, right? And the Ark is also in the biblical story associated with, a reset. Whenever you have these kind of supermoon Trinity stories, there's probably a reset involved with the story, right? But anyway, he look at his weapon. He has the same weapon as Thanos, right? And then he ends up in a Trinity fight with Megatron, which is a word that means moon. This is why Megatron has a hole in his head, or part of his face is missing half the movie. You'll see it encoded in a lot of characters who represent the moon. They'll either get shot in the back of the head, and this goes along with real life characters as well, or they'll be have a chunk of their head missing in the film. The same kind of idea was shown in the Terminator, one of the recent Terminator films, where one of the Terminators could turn between two different forms, and one was sun-like. He always had a yellow shirt on, and the other was moon-like. And what's funny is, Megatron is a character who represents a moon. In the first film, he's a Titan versus three little Transformers, and one of the Transformers he almost breaks in half. Well, he does break in half, named Jazz, and that kind of scene was almost done scene for scene, where Thanos picked up Iron Man, was trying to pull him in half at one point. And it's not because these films are all inspired or copying each other. It's because they're telling the same stories. And then you can see here the Tennessee Titans symbol is pretty obvious. You see the Titans is associated with giants or supermoon, right? And anytime you hear a story about Titans, it's always going to have the moon involved. Think about the story of Titanic. Both the film and the real life event. A supermoon is responsible for both of the stories. And then Rose is a character who represents the moon. But this Tennessee Titan symbol has the symbol of Janus in it as well. And I wonder, a lot of people who are religious know they're driving around, if they're driving Teslas, with a car that has a god on there or a deity in Janus. But before we move on, let's just look at the idea of the pyramids, right? So in the pyramids of Giza, we see that it has the Orion's belt, right? So it has 3 stars aligned. And I think that these pyramids might be telling these stories because they're some of the most popular stories that are retold or encoded in characters. So, for example, we have the pyramids here, right? And you can see there's one that has a supermoon or a bigger pyramid with 3 little small pyramids. So it's telling that story of the supermoon versus the 3 little stars. And sometimes it'll be vice versa, where it'll be a giant star or the sun versus 3 moons. But then we also see the same thing with this other one in the center that has a giant pyramid, right, which is a play on the supermoon. And right in front of it is the Sphinx, which is a play on Leo the Lion. So this is a story about the small lion versus the giant moon. And you see this in a lot of other films. I did a video on it a little while ago. But in The Matrix, for example, the woman, the Oracle, she eats cookies a lot, letting you know she's the moon, right? And she's a character who is associated with the dream world, the Matrix, right? It's being able to see it all. And then you have the architect, right, who wants order, and he's like Leo the Lion. He has the full beard, and it's letting you know that characteristics between both of them. And this other pyramid over here, I haven't quite figured out yet what story that's telling, but it seems like these pyramids are telling that's this story of the 3 stars versus the Titan. And then you see the Leo the Lion versus the supermoon, or the giant or the Titan. And this one I'll figure it out at some point. But even the real life so-called stories that we have of the astronauts going to the moon, right? It always encode a trinity of astronauts, right? 3 astronauts going to the moon. even the trajectory of the ship. You can see the space dust encodes a trinity, right? Because it's letting you know. So these three men were able to make one small step for NASA, and then one giant step for mankind. I think is the statement, but nonetheless, you can see, and then even see in their interviews is the trinity of them, and even their splashdown ship has the same kind of idea going on, where you have a pyramid and then three little balls on top. So you can see that all of these are encoding or retelling the story of the sky, just three stars and a supermoon. And why would this be? Is because there's really no original stories. Everything that you're being told, even including history, is a copying off of what people have told as stories based off of the sky. So look at this recent film, Moonfall. You can see it's a giant moon coming down or crashing to Earth. They use that idea of fear because they're leveraging the idea of a supermoon. I wouldn't even be surprised if this film came out around a supermoon, a real life supermoon. But you see that it has the idea of the moon falling, right? Or a giant rock or asteroid coming out of the sky, because all these stories encode the moon. Even the story of David and Goliath, a small guy throws a rock at a rock. The rock is always encoding the moon. And every story involving titans or giants will always be able to be pointed back to a story being told about the moon. But in this film, Moonfall, at the beginning of the film, I think three astronauts are in space, and then there's some type of AI or something like that on the moon that attacks and kills them. But it's a trinity of astronauts. So you see the supermoon beats that trinity. And then the final act of this film, Halle Berry and the other actors, they end up going up. So it's still a trinity versus the moon. You always will see this. Even depictions of what people, like colonies on the moon, you're going to see like three towers on the moon or three cities on the moon, because it's telling the same story. And this is a good picture to hold on in your mind. It'll help just give you a sense of what's being shown throughout the video. But even look at this. Look at Congress or the Senate. Look at the seating arrangement. That's a crescent moon, right? Or half of a moon with three stars in the center. It's not by coincidence. That's exactly what's being shown. We have three separate branches of government. That also plays on the same idea. And when you have a trinity without the challenge of the moon, the trinity is battling within each other, within itself. That's a common theme you should always remember. If there's no challenge for the trinity, then it's going to battle itself, right? And it makes it stronger. So for when the full moon comes, then, or the super moon, they're able to challenge it. And just think about like a Air Force One escorts, same idea of forming the trinity. And these pictures I'm just showing you to kind of put it in your mind of what you're really seeing. If you can imagine that these characters are actually stars being personified as human beings or actors to tell you a story, right? So you have the Matrix, right? And the Matrix is a dream world. So it's a moon-based reality, completely different than how we live, where it's a pretty much sun-based world, right? In this reality, this is why all the heroes are dressed in full black, right? They look like the villains in the real world. And then the agents are all with black suits but white shirts on. And you see that when they actually fight the vampire crew, a lot of them have white on as well, because it's an inversion of the idea. But you have the Trinity here, and the final boss of the film is all the robots coming together to form a supermoon kind of thing, or the eye in the sky. And this always happens in reset films, as I showed in other videos. Unicron in the sky, Eye of Sauron, Corona in the sky. These are all the same ideas, just telling you that when there's a supermoon coming, there's going to be a reset. And this film even shows the inversion of that idea, where you have Neo, who is the sun-based character, versus three moon-based characters. And then they even invert it where when he can see the code of the Matrix, they're the sun-based characters and he's the moon-based character, or vice versa. But it's a trinity between sun versus moon that's being shown. And then in the later films, you have Neo goes missing or something like that. He gets kidnapped, and they go to this guy named Seraph, which is a play on the Seraph myth. So he's kind of like an angel type character, right? And he helps guide them to the train man. And the train man, not by coincidence, is a giant compared to them. He's way taller than them. So they have to chase the train man down and end up tracing them to hell. But these are telling you the stories of three stars versus the moon now. or chasing the moon. And there's a scene in one of the later Matrix films where they approach this staircase, and the staircase is shaped as a crescent of a moon, and the three stars are walking in the crescent of the moon. And that's where a big fight scene happens, but it's not by coincidence. It's encoded in that. And if you even look at the ceiling of this building, you can see the sun pointing down, or the ceiling shaped as the sun. Another concept or film that has this idea is the Blade Trinity series. You know, Blade is usually a character who works alone, but for the final act, the big one came, Dracula, who's in this case kind of encoding the supermoon. But it's an inversion of the idea, right? Because Dracula is now a daywalker, and you can see that he has the Hellions with him who are, like, you know, of the moon type ideas. They're with him to help hunt Dracula. And this movie is interesting because it has a lot of hidden symbolism or constellations. There's a scene where Blade is talking to Dracula over top of a building about hunters, and it shows constellation Zoe and or Zoe, and that's the story of like Diana the Huntress. You also see that same idea when the Avengers are able to take down or give the final blow to Ultron. You have Vision and Thor and Iron Man shoot them, but it forms that constellation. And the same thing with the Predator. The Predator has that beam. There's a lot of films I can show you that in, but for this one, let's just focus on the Trinity idea. And in this film, you know, they put Triple H in there as one of a wrestler who's like a giant wrestler, and that's not by coincidence because they're letting you know that it's always encodes stories of the giants. You know, whenever you see a Trinity, the final boss may not be a giant, but somewhere in the film for sure. And sometimes amongst the heroes, one of them might be a giant. You see this in fighting games or the beat 'em up games, where video games where there's a trinity of characters across the screen, and one of them will usually be a titan or a giant compared to the other, or a tank, as they call. In the recent Spider-Man films, you see there's a trinity of Spider-Mans for no reason, but there are. And before there's a trinity, there's just regular Spider-Man, and he meets the villains, and he's able to talk to them for a while. And we have Sandman, who's in his normal form, but once the trinity forms, Sandman becomes a giant, and that's not by coincidence. It's all encoding the sky. The same thing happens in the original Spider-Man trilogy, where he has three villains he has to fight to make money, right? For the company to make money, they put three villains in there, but he has three villains he has to fight, and the Goblin, Sandman, and Venom. And the final act, when the trinity of villains are out there, Sandman is a giant now, and that's not by coincidence. It's because they're telling the story of the sky through characters. And sometimes the enemy may be invisible, right? It may be an invisible enemy. Just think about the idea of the moon. The moon it has different phases. It may not be visible. It may be a crescent. It may be a half. But in the Captain America film, we have the trinity of helicarriers, right? And the enemy is not visible, so the turmoil is between their selves. And this is a common way to tell the same story. They just shuffle it up and present it to you in new dramatic ways, but it's really the same story of what people are observing the sky, or what the sky does. And in the Civil War Marvel film, you had all the heroes fighting each other, but there's a specific scene where Giant Man becomes a giant, and these trinity of characters are what's needed to knock them down. And it's not by coincidence that it has to be a trinity. And there's only a few ways to kill giants, because it's the idea on pulling or stopping the moon. You attack it directly in the face, back of the head, go inside of it, and you see all these kind of things happen to Giant Man, even though they don't kill him. But it's all encoding how would you destroy the moon. The same thing, or lasso it, as you'll see in a lot of films. Lassoing the moon is the idea, so you see why Spider-Man's wrapping the legs up. And the same thing happens in one of the Star Wars films, where the scene is based off of, where these AT walkers come, and that's the way they take them down. And there's more than three that are shown in the film, but when they first appear, they appear in a trinity of three like that. So it's an inversion of the idea. And this is like kind of even where we get the idea of the story of the three little pigs and the big bad wolf, right? A wolf is an animal that's associated with the moon, and the pigs are animals that are associated with the zodiac calendar, so they represent the sun. And then we have the pig, which is a play on the moon, and it's an inversion of that idea. You can even look at the The circle that's around the pigs is letting you know that it's about the moon and the sun, or the moon and 3 stars. The Legend of Zelda is a pretty obvious one. It's a show or a series about a trinity, and Link is a character who represents the moon. This is why his name is Link. It sounds just like Abraham Lincoln. He has a slingshot. We slingshot to the moon. This is the same idea, just encoded in a character, right? But in this series, there's a lot of giants, and specifically, there's this one game called Triforce Heroes, and there is you can see there's 3 different Links or 3 characters based off of Link, and then they're fighting a giant. And that's one of the promotional artworks for the game, but it's encoding that story, right? And you can see that the weapon that the giant is using points to the moon also. And you notice that Link is using like a giant hammer. A lot of times when people are battling giants, it'll be a hammer or axe to use against it. And there's even some films or pictures or ideas where there's 3 moons versus a star, and you might see this in like a sci-fi fiction film. And another thing to mention is you might see an inversion of the idea where they're battling someone who's super tiny, 3 tiny people versus a giant person or something like that. But I mean, you can even see this symbol on Oreo cookies, letting you know that it's an encode about 3 stars versus the moon. And if you notice, a space shuttle, it has the 3 boosters that are connected to it that dislodge, and it's for that reason. It's because it's a trinity. They probably could have all fit it in 2 different boosters, 4 boosters. Why is there 3? It's because it's a trinity. And this is seen in almost any story that has to do with the moon. You're going to see a trinity of some type associated with it. In the recent Naruto series, right, there's the Eye of the Moon phase, right? And anytime you have an eye in the sky or a moon in the sky, that's super. There's going to be a reset. So this is a reset series. But their final boss in this series is a character named Kaguya, I believe. And they're able to only beat her once the Trinity is formed, and the Trinity fights her. And Naruto is a series that always had a 3-man team, and it's probably for that reason. And just in case you think this idea there's no truth to this idea, this isn't every time you see a trinity of characters, you can bet it that's going to be against the sun or a giant moon. In the Batman versus Superman film, when there was no big threat, there was turmoil. Batman and Superman were fighting each other, remember? But then the moon came, the super moon or the Titan came, and they all had to fight together. And this was a great film to introduce Wonder Woman in, because it kind of matches that myth where, you have the Titan. But and you can just pay attention to the fight scenes in this film, how Wonder Woman's attacking Doomsday. It's almost the same way that the Avengers tried to attack Thanos, cutting at the ankle or stabbing in the back of the neck, because there's only a certain amount of ways that you can kill a Titan, because it's a play on how to take down the moon. And, as Captain America was the bright star that rose up out of nowhere or had a hidden power in the Avengers Endgame film, Wonder Woman is kind of shown to be that in this film, right? She's shining bright. Her shield is shining like the sun. So there's always going to be an element where one character has an unknown ability or rises up. I think in the Ultron film, it was Vision. Vision surprised everyone with his ability in the final act, And you look at this film, Doomsday is a direct play on the moon. Like, he looks just like a character who looks like the moon. And he was created from General Zod, but Lex Luthor or Luxor, which is, like the pyramid idea. This is where we get the idea of like luxury brand vehicles. This is why most vehicles that are luxury are moon based. But he's the one who helped reawaken or create Doomsday. And Doomsday is the character who's definitely the moon, or personifying the moon. And this is what we see, the outcome of it. The Trinity has to form to take him down. I mean, in the old Superman, I think Superman 2, where you had General Zod come and he came with a Trinity, they're all in black, like the moon, and Superman is the sun man, is an inversion of that idea. But when they show these characters, they're always associated with the cross. You can see the cross in this picture, right? And or the moon. There's a scene where they actually go to the moon to try to wreak havoc on the moon, excuse me. And that's because these stories are really just telling you the story about the sun and or the moon. But specifically in this Trinity type stories, it's about a trinity of moon-based characters approaching or going to the supermoon or the superstar, and or vice versa. I mean, this idea also goes on for the Justice League film where Steppenwolf comes, who's a play on the Sirius Dog Star, just like he's traveling here to prepare the world for Dark Side of the Moon, which is also a supermoon story. But he's a Titan compared to the Justice League, and you can see, they actually get the confidence to start really fighting against them when they're forming a trinity. But luckily for them, Superman came. So the story switched from the three tiny stars to the Leo the Lion character beating the Titan, and or the not the Titan or the moon, the full moon. But we'll see what happens when the supermoon comes in a later film, kind of idea. And then also like the Harry Potter films, you have the trinity of characters, versus the giant troll, and it's not by coincidence. They're always going to be whenever you have these characters together in the trinity, you can expect them to battle a troll at some point, or not a troll, but a giant or something way taller than them at some point. The recent Sonic film, he formed a new trinity of characters or allies in this film. And look at Sonic and Knuckles and Tails. They're an inversion or play on the idea of like Captain America, Tails being Falcon. He has the goggles and the red bird, and then you have Knuckles, who's the Winter Soldier. It's not by coincidence. It's not because these things are inspired by each other. It's because they're telling the same story about the stars and characters, so they have overlap. Just think about the opening scene of Captain America Winter Soldier. You have Cap saying on your left, and Falcon can't keep up. It's the same idea with Falcon, with Sonic and Tails. But in this film, they battle each other out before there was a super threat, right? It was them having turmoil amongst each other where Knuckles was against them, right? And Robotnik was just a little character in this film. And his name is Eggman, which is a point back to the spring, like the Easter Bunny, but also to the moon. And in this film, when he turns into a giant or a titan, they form a trinity to fight against them. And there's conversation about we have to attack his weak spot, which is the groin, because the word groin points back to the moon, which is like the word we get the word Gru from, or Groot, as in the Avengers series. All these words point back to the moon. You get the idea of like growth hormones from the moon. And there's a lot of words like Gru or Gore in the recent Thor film, or Gara from Naruto. These are all characters who are representing the moon. This is why the little character from Gremlins, Grem means moon, right? Looks just like the character from The Mandalorian, the Baby Yoda. And I think the Baby Yoda's name is like Gragu, and because these are all the words that point to the moon. But they say, how can we beat this Titan? We have to punch him in the groin, because they're letting you know that we can't beat. How do we beat the moon? We have to beat the moon the way the moon gets beat. And you can see them fighting, and like the other stories, out of nowhere, Sonic gets a new ability or shines brighter, and he becomes a sun-based character. In the beginning of the film, he was known as some type of moon hero, like a moon superhero. And then Knuckles came, and Knuckles is a character who has a moon crescent directly on his chest, letting you know he is the moon. But this goes over most people's heads. You remember Knuckles is a parallel to Bucky from Captain America, and Bucky is a character who represents the Buck Moon, and Captain America is a character who represents an angel or angle of the sun. That's why he has a star. So you see the same idea just being told over through these characters. And then in one of the recent Godzilla films, right, the keyword God is in the name of Godzilla. But Godzilla is something that encodes the moon, right? But he fights this giant three-headed dragon, and the three-headed dragon forms like a trinity. And the wingspan of dragons, whenever you see dragons in films or pterodactyls, always look at their wingspan and how they're showing it. It's always going to show you a moon crescent, because these characters and these ideas always point to the moon. But you can see this, I think it's Ghidorah or something, coming out of the volcano with a crescent moon pointing up. Same symbol as the Eye of Sauron, but just with the Trinity in the middle, and directly parallel to it is the cross, letting you know this is the sun versus crescent or evil Trinity of moon idea that's about to happen in this fight. And similar, there's a film called Reign of Fire that's about these dragons taking over the world, giant titans popping out of nowhere. And Christian Bale, which is the character who letting you know son, right? His name is Quinn in this film, and he is working with these two other characters, a trinity, to take down the titans, right? And you can see one of them is the alpha male. He's like the bright star in this film, right? He has an axe too. Axe is always needed to take down the titan or the moon, but he ends up sacrificing himself so that the other two can have a shot. And Christian Bale out of nowhere rises up to the challenge, kind of get that new ability or shining bright like a star. Kind of scene that happens in this film. And they do the same thing with the dragon. One tries to go directly at its face with the axe and doesn't work, but then the other one has to shoot something inside of it, because there's only a certain amount of ways to kill titans or dragons or the moon. The recent Deadpool film, Juggernaut is added to it, and it's an inversion of the idea where Juggernaut has this bright yellow costume on because he just got out of jail, but not because of that. It's only because they're letting you know he is representing the sun versus three gothic-like moon-based characters, and they fight him and they don't win at first, and then they end up going inside of the building, but then Colossus comes, right? So now you have a giant star or the sun versus Colossus, who's like a full moon, and Colossus isn't able to do it by itself. But then the other two Gothic characters come from the X-Men, forming a new trinity, and they're able to beat them. And that's not like coincidence. These rules are. It seems like they're made where the people who are writing stories have to follow it, or they subconsciously or unknowingly are writing the story of the sky. I mean, in this story, this idea of the sky being encoded in these Trinity stories is so apparent. You look at the story of the three amigos. All you have to do is look at their hats. Right? You see the moon, you see the sun, you see the cross or the sun or a star in it. The same idea with the Three Musketeers were actually four, right? But it's the same thing. And just think about the idea of the three wise men searching for the shining star, following the star, right? It's the same idea, just encoded in different ways. It's the inversion of it. Another arc in the Naruto series is there's these three little kids who are not really trained, but they end up taking out like this super guy named Salamander, he has like a giant frog or something like that. It's an inversion of the ideas, and you see one of them has his hair spiky like the sun. So you have also the same story where it's three stars versus a bigger moon character or a super moon type character. I mean, this goes on and on. In one of the Jurassic Park films, when they created that Indoraptor, you have Blue and another raptor try to take it down with the T-Rex. So you had two tiny stars and a T-Rex, but one of the stars ended up dying. One of the raptors died. So it ended up being Blue, right, which is a play on Sirius Dogstar. And you'll see Sirius Dogstar as a character in other films as well, a part of the Trinity. But you have, for instance, the Sonic film Tails is a play on Sirius the Dogstar. And, but that goes on and on. And in this film, they end up having the Mosasaurus, right? And the Moses is a character who's in the Bible, or a character who's based off of also the kind of idea of the stories. Jump out of the water and with the other two, form a trinity to take down the supermoon, the Indoraptor. And then in the most recent film, I think the final battle between dinosaurs is just the trinity of three giant dinosaurs fighting each other. In the Lord of the Rings series, you have the opposite of that, right? You have the Leo the Lion Kingdom, right, or the House of Lannister versus the House of Daenerys, I believe, which is the Dragon Kingdom, and of course she has three Titan dragons. So she has it's a real inversion of that idea where you have three Titans versus the tiny Lion Kingdom. And to further add to that idea, they have a dwarf usually in these type of films. This is why the one dwarf from the Lion Kingdom comes to the Dragon Kingdom, because it's letting you know these stories are about the sky, right? They're just encoded through people. This same idea even happens in the Infinity Saga, where that same actor is playing a giant in space, right? On a dead, a dwarfed sun or a dwarfed star. But he's also a giant. So it's a play on all these ideas where you have a tiny star versus Anthony Stark or Supermoon versus a bunch of tiny stars, and or vice versa. But that's what's being encoded with these stories. So whenever you see like a three-headed animal in a myth or something like that, you should figure out what they represent. Like a Leo the lion with three heads. You're looking at the encode of these kind of stories being told.